In 1806, panic emerged in Leeds, England. A growing number of people there were convinced that the world was going to end because of a chicken. This was no ordinary chicken though. The eggs it laid had a shell with faint but visible markings that read, "Christ is coming," a clear sign of the apocalypse if ever there was one. And it's not like these eggs had been just randomly found. There was a specific hen that was responsible, and people from all over traveled to Leeds to actually witness the prophet poultry laying the Christ eggs. It was a miracle. The scripture eggs actually came from the chicken. It's not as if someone just wrote on them, except that that's exactly what happened. A woman named Mary Bateman, who has gone down in history as a con artist, murderer, and alleged witch, was at this point part of a religious sect and hatched the whole scheme by writing the messages on the eggs and then putting them back inside of the chicken. This is actually where we get the expression, "guess what chicken butt?" Probably, but regardless, the prediction did not come true, and not just because the hen wasn't actually a prophet, but because people have been making predictions about the end of the world since the beginning of the world, and no one has been correct so far. Except for that one dinosaur, Nostradamosaurus. That guy was like spot on. But anyway, today we're gonna have a look at 8 times that the apocalypse was predicted. Many people believed it, but in the end never came. Oh, by the way, this getup was supposed to look a bit more apocalyptic, but I couldn't find a yellow one, so now I just kind of look like a painter now, but that's alright, it's not the end of the world. Comets have long been a source of panic for humankind, and you can imagine why. It's a pretty scary thing to witness a ball of fire in the sky. Except for the sun, we're kinda used to that, but generally comets were considered bad omens, foretelling the death of kings, defeat in war, natural disaster, or some other bad thing. We can see this all throughout history, including in this 11th century tapestry depicting the events that led to the Norman conquest of England, event which was foreshadowed by a comet in the sky that these people seemed really worried about. Oh my god, there's a comet in the sky. Oh no, what does it mean? Oh, I bet it foreshadows the Norman conquest of England. Oh no, that's the last thing we want. Oh no. What they didn't know at the time was that the comet they were seeing was one that had visited Earth before, many times actually, in a cycle that went back tens of thousands of years, and which had been observed numerous times throughout history. In fact, some argue that the very same comet's appearance in 12 BC might have just been the one that inspired 3 wise men to travel towards it. You know, the Star of Bethlehem, which in some paintings looks suspiciously similar to a comet. Only in 1705, a British astronomer named Edmund Halley figured out it was actually the same comet visiting Earth over and over again. He calculated its orbit and determined that it visits on average every 76 years. After that, it was known as Halley's Comet, and it became an anticipated astronomical event all throughout the world. However, in 1910, anticipation turned into fear, after it was announced that this time, the comet would pass much closer to the Earth. And when I say much closer, I mean like 20 million kilometers, around 50 times the distance to the moon. You know, super close. In any case, it would be closer than any time in the past 1,000 years, and enough so that the Earth would actually pass through the comet's tail, which sounds bad even now, but back then, when we didn't even know that much about comets, it seemed like it would be the end of the world, especially since recently they had just discovered that the tail of the comet contains cyanogen, a toxic gas related to cyanide, which made it seem like we were all gonna get sprayed and exterminated like a bunch of cosmic insects. In reality, there was no danger, and scientists tried to assure the public that everything was gonna be alright, since the density of the comet's tail was incredibly small and our atmosphere would protect us no problemo. However, journalists ran wild with the story. They speculated, they made stuff up, they intentionally misinterpreted what scientists had said, and in an era where most of the public got its information from newspapers, this would lead to a dangerous worldwide panic. And then, during this time of fear and speculation, in the southern hemisphere, another comet appeared in the sky. A completely new one that nobody was expecting, and which turned out to be the brightest comet of the 20th century. This made people even more worried about comets, and it cast doubt on scientists in general who had no idea this thing was coming, so maybe they don't know that much about Halley's Comet either. Maybe it won't just pass near us, but maybe it will actually hit us directly. Charlatans were quick to exploit people's fears, selling all kinds of anti-comet products like gas masks, umbrellas, pills, or even insurance. Although, if we all die from the comet, then I'm not sure who's left to pay up your insurance, but whatever, people were frightened, you know? Some even sealed their keyholes to prevent the gas from entering, just like I do when I go use the bathroom, but to prevent it from escaping. Of course, none of that was necessary. The comet came and went with no issue, and the only apocalyptic prediction that came true was that of Mark Twain, who famously said, "I came in with Halley's Comet, and I expect to go out with it." And he was right. He was born in 1835 and he died in 1910, leading a near-perfect comet-to-comet lifespan. Halley's next appearance in 1986 sparked no more apocalyptic predictions, possibly due to the fact that it was much farther this time on the other side of the sun, and its visibility was the least favorable on record. However, in 2061, it will be back, and it will be visible, and in 37 years from now, I hope we all get to see it. But just like Twain, by that time, the end of the world might seem a lot closer to me personally. Oh man, now I've gone and gotten myself sad thinking about mortality. Just like the people in 2012. As 2012 approached, more and more people were worried that the 21st of December of that year would bring about the end of the world because of the Mayan calendar. The Maya were a mysterious but sophisticated civilization with advanced astronomical knowledge and a complex calendar system that on the 21st of December 2012 simply ended, as if the world would just stop on that day. Many people believed that the Mayans must have been onto something and that the world would indeed end, although it wasn't clear how. Maybe a solar eruption or a volcanic one, a series of earthquakes or floods, polar magnetic reversal, a collision with the mysterious planet X, or a cosmic alignment that would somehow cause the Earth to explode. All these possibilities and many more were endlessly discussed in books, magazines, YouTube videos, or Discovery Channel shows. They even made a movie about 2012 called 2012, which makes it difficult to find on torrent sites because you get all the movies from the year 2012 but not the actual movie 2012, which was made in 2009, or so I hear. Anyway, as a serious journalist, I watched the movie for research purposes in order to find out which of these disasters caused the apocalypse. And the movie's answer to this question is yes. Multiple disasters happen at once without too much scientific detail, and in my opinion the movie's alright if you fast forward through most of the dialogue and just focus on the mesmerizing scenes of mass destruction of human civilization in 3D. Anyway, this is the kind of stuff that people were expecting might happen, and not a few of them either. Polls showed that nearly 10% of participants were worried about 2012's arrival. Some towns prepared provisions and emergency shelter in case of apocalypse actually comes, and a bunch of people traveled to various destinations that might offer protection, like this pyramid-shaped mountain in Serbia that some people thought might emit a life-saving force field or something. Pyramid power, am I right? Many people took the 2012 phenomena pretty seriously, but can we really blame them though? I mean, it must mean something. After all, of all the dates in history, why would the Mayans end their calendar on that day specifically? Well, the simple answer is they didn't. The calendar didn't end, it just moved on to a new cycle. You see, the Mayan system works like this. They thought that the world started with the day of creation, which happened on the 11th of August 3114 BC. Except of course they didn't call it that, they didn't know who Jesus was, but the day of creation was written as 00000. Next day after that is 00001, and then 2, and so on until you get 20 days, which make a winal, and then 18 winal make up a tune, which make around a year, and then 20 tunes make a cartoon, and then 20 cartoons make a baktoon. Using this type of numbering, you can indicate any date in history, you know, like a calendar. For instance, this is my birthday, this is Jesus' birthday, and this is the 8th of August 888, which surprisingly contains no 8s. The only thing that changed on the 21st of December 2012 is that the date went from this to this. We just entered a new baktoon, and I know 13 is unlucky, but this definitely didn't imply any kind of ending, especially since the Mayans had even larger units of measurement than the baktoon, including the alautun, a period of around 63 million years. I mean, why would you create your calendar to count up to millions of years if the world was going to end after the first few thousand? Archaeologists tried in vain to explain that the 21st of December had no particular significance in Mayan scriptures, unlike other dates that definitely did, including ones after 2012, and how this change of baktoon was something that had already happened 12 times before, last time in 1618, and that this whole thing was just a giant misunderstanding. Nothing was ending, we were just entering a new cycle, kind of like entering a new millennium in our own calendar, which I'm sure you will all agree, entering a new millennium is no reason for panic. Except Story goes that in the year 1000, a whole ton of Christians were convinced that the new millennium would bring about the end of days. And not just because 1000 is a nice round number, but also because of biblical prophecies from the book of Revelation, where several times the idea of the millennium is brought up, namely a period of 1000 years in which Christ will rule as king before the second coming or after the second coming. It's not clear, there's multiple interpretations, unlike the rest of the Bible. Am I right? Anyway, it's easy to imagine that in the year 999, medieval superstitious Christians might have been a bit concerned about the new millennium. However, this story is mostly a myth. It's true that there was apocalyptic anxiety around the year 1000, but that was nothing new. Same could be said for pretty much any year around that time, with medieval Christians living in an almost constant state of expecting the world to end. It's a neat story, fits great with the theme of this video, but historians generally reject the idea that the year 1000 was particularly apocalyptic. However, the year 2000 certainly was. And not because of religious reasons, although there were plenty of those, but rather due to one of the most bizarre and absurd problems that no ancient prophecy could have ever predicted. You see, in the 90s, computers were much less powerful than they are now. Processors were much slower, hard drives had a capacity of a few gigabytes if you were rich, monitors were bigger but also smaller in all the worst ways, and memory was, small. So small, in fact, that in order to save some memory, computers in their dating systems would only input the last 2 digits of the year. So instead of writing 1990, it was enough to just write 90. After all, why waste resources, you know? The first 2 digits almost never change. Until, of course, they did. As the year 2000 was closing in, people started worrying how software systems would manage the transition from 99 to 00 and what they would make of it. Maybe it would be read as the year 2000, or maybe 1900, or just plain 100, or maybe even 0, or maybe programs won't even be able to process it altogether, leading to glitches and crashes in essential fields such as banking, GPS, electric grids, water systems, military networks, medical devices, and plenty of others. In 1999, for many, it seemed that on the 31st of December, midnight might bring the complete collapse of human civilization. And even if the danger was exaggerated, the mere fact that many people believed it might have been enough to destabilize modern society. Of course, here in the future, we have spoilers for history, so we know that didn't happen. In actuality, software developers had been extensively preparing for the new millennium by updating programs to make them Y2K compatible, with a fortune being spent on a worldwide effort to fix the issue. And in most cases it worked, although there were still plenty of anomalies around the world. Things like the year 1900 that kept popping up in receipts and bills and graduation certificates or court dates or even prisoner release dates, which in Italy were briefly scheduled to happen 100 years in the past. A Korean baby was registered as being born in 1900, a Danish baby was registered as being 100 years old, a 105-year-old Norwegian woman was offered a spot in kindergarten, and 2 video stores issued massive late fees due to rentals registering as 100 years late. There were some glitches and malfunctions with traffic lights in Jamaica, or ticket machines in Australia, or payroll in Germany, where a man briefly became a millionaire due to an erroneous bank transaction in a statement dated December 30th, 1899 somehow. There were many other examples, some of which were a bit more serious, but in general the glitches were minor and had been fixed pretty quickly as the world survived into the new millennium. Although technically the new millennium started in 2001, but let's not be that guy. To this day, those who worked on Y2K compliance claim that the situation was indeed quite serious, and if a massive global effort hadn't been undertaken, then it could have been a lot worse. And wouldn't that have just been the strangest way for the world to end? I mean, what a weird and specific problem to have. In order for this to happen, we had to be going through a once-in-a-millennia change in the numbering system used in our calendar during the very specific period in early computing in which memory requirements were just so as to make it worth it to drop the first 2 digits of the year. You can imagine that if there are other civilizations out there in the universe, odds are they might not have had this particular problem during their technological evolution. Although truth be told, the same might have happened if we were going from 1800 to 1900, but still, let's not not spoil the analogy. Fact is, in a large multi-civilizational universe, humans might just have been remembered as that one weird species that died off because of a bizarre coincidence with some zeros. Alien versions of myself would have been all over it in their YouTube videos. However, Y2K was not just about the year. On a more spiritual level, it was a reaction and fear to the immense technological transformation the human race had witnessed in the past decades. In one lifetime, we went from horse and buggy to the Hubble telescope, and that is a crazy and scary amount of change, and coinciding with the turn of the millennium, Y2K seems to have been the entirety of humanity letting off steam in unison, yelling out in fear, what the hell is gonna happen? I mean, this is nuts. Have you seen the internet? Have you seen phones now? You can just take them with you. Our fear of scientific advancement also caused a slight but memorable scare at the inauguration of the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, Switzerland. This was the largest scientific machine ever created, an underground circular tunnel 27 kilometers long containing super advanced machinery that would manipulate electromagnetic fields in order to accelerate elementary particles at close to the speed of light. By smashing these tiny particles together, scientists hope to break them apart even more so they can study the fundamental building blocks of the universe and forces that govern it. They hoped to discover new particles, maybe figure out what dark matter is, the evolution of the early universe, some pretty good stuff, you know? However, all of these fascinating prospects were overshadowed by the possibility that these experiments could lead to the formation of a black hole. In 2008, when it was inaugurated, CERN was not the first particle accelerator in the world, but it was and still is the biggest. And because it was experimenting with enormous amounts of energy, the scientific community wanted to make sure it was safe. They established a committee, had some meetings, did some calculations, and determined that there was no danger. However, not everybody was convinced, especially journalists who wrote pieces in some of the largest publications in the world about how the accelerator in Switzerland might lead to the creation of a small black hole. And however small it might be, if there's one thing we all know about black holes, is that nothing can escape their gravitational pull, not even, come on, say it with me, not even light. There you go. Many people were against these experiments. There were protests and demonstrations and even threats against the scientists involved. To be fair, scientists didn't say there would definitely be no black holes, but they did say that it was extremely unlikely, and if it did happen, then it would be submicroscopic, and due to Hawking radiation, it would evaporate in about 0.00000000000000000000000000000000001 seconds, which is, you know, pretty fast. Besides, what the accelerator does is nothing in comparison to the collisions that happen naturally all the time in our own atmosphere. Traveling at basically the speed of light, cosmic rays from the sun or from the cosmos are constantly colliding with particles from our own atmosphere at much higher energy levels than those in a particle accelerator, and no black holes have swallowed up the Earth just yet. Which is reassuring, but still kind of goes to show how insignificant even our biggest scientific experiment is, and how a 27-kilometer machine that requires decades to build, millennia of study and eons of evolution to come into existence is still nothing compared to what the cosmos can do by casually existing. Still, if we did manage to create a black hole, then that would not only be safe, but also one of the greatest scientific achievements of all time, but good luck convincing the public of that. And the thing is, with future, bigger, more powerful accelerators, then that might actually be possible, so this is one apocalyptic anxiety that isn't going away, and it's understandable. Science has provided tremendous achievements for humanity, but the powers unleashed by our technological advancement can also be used for destruction. Not prophetic or metaphoric or mystical apocalypse, but a real, tangible, concrete annihilation of all life on Earth, and not just by accident, but on purpose. Better technology also means better weapons, and in the 20th century this became terrifyingly obvious in World War I, which came after a few decades-long period of relative peace in Europe, and people kind of didn't realize how good weapons had become in the meantime. Most people were expecting a brief conflict, but when the Great War started, no one was anticipating the extent of the devastation which would follow. The almost romantic notion of war that sometimes existed in the past, the image of the noble soldier charging bravely up a hill, had instantly been shattered to pieces as the newly invented Maxim gun could shoot 600 rounds per minute, obliterating entire armies of soldiers before you could fasten your gorget. Then there were the other guns, the big ones, and the really big ones. And then the bombs and the planes, and the vehicles and the warships and the wireless communications and chemical weapons, and basically the absolute pinnacle of scientific achievement used to kill as efficiently as possible. And then of course, in World War II, we created the ultimate weapon, the atomic bomb, a device based on the cutting edge of scientific research in the field of quantum physics, in which atoms were split, releasing the energy inside of them, which would split more atoms, which would split more atoms and more, and so on, creating a chain reaction that would release gigantic amounts of energy almost instantly. Basically a really big bomb, one capable of wiping out an entire city from the map and killing millions in one blow. And as if that weren't enough, even after the explosion, the entire area would become toxic because of all of the radioactive matter scattered around, which for decades to come would deteriorate human cells, causing genetic mutations, cancer, and death. And as if even that wasn't enough, scientists say that a large-scale atomic war would cause a so-called nuclear winter because the atmosphere would fill up with soot, which would be blown about by the wind until the sky would darken, blocking the sun, cooling the planet, destroying crops, destabilizing ecosystems, and just turning the world into a real apocalyptic hellhole in general. Still, even before the atomic bomb, the 3 decades of the world wars led to the death of around 100 million people. It was one of the most apocalyptic times in history, although it's not often thought about in those terms. It's almost as if people had no time to play at the apocalypse when they were actively trying to avoid the actual end of the world, or at least the end of their world. The possibility of nuclear war has been a constant concern ever since, especially for those that actually developed the technology, like in that one movie. I think it was the other one. Fear peaked during the Cold War when the USA and USSR kept measuring their nuclear arsenals to see whose is bigger, which led to a tense situation and close calls in which nuclear weapons have been lost or dropped out of planes or almost used by accident. The most famous example was that of a Russian submarine in 1962, whose crew erroneously thought that they were under attack, so they considered launching a nuclear torpedo, and 2 of the 3 officers responsible voted yes, let's do it. The one guy who voted no, Vasily Arkhipov, might have just saved humanity from the worst war in its history. However, even after the end of the Cold War, the possibility never really went away, and a nuclear war might be the most plausible end-of-world scenario on this list. However, that exact fact seems to be the reason why those that have such weapons don't really want to use them. It's the concept of mutually assured destruction. You attack me, then I attack you, and we all die. This terrifying possibility is what seems to keep a tense but stable peace between the world's superpowers, at least for now. And how ironic would it be if the invention of the ultimate weapon of war would lead to the end of war itself? Not right now. Definitely not right now. Maybe in the future, or maybe never, or maybe there's an even more powerful technology out there that we have yet to create. In today's computerized age, the apocalypse meme has entered its latest iteration: artificial intelligence. We seem to be currently going through the early stages of a brand new apocalyptic scare that started with sci-fi authors and some of the most popular movie franchises of all time, and might just end with the complete annihilation of the human race. But that's just like the worst case scenario. We could also just, put us in a zoo or something. Might seem a bit silly to take movies so seriously, but there are some pretty convincing arguments made not just by Hollywood writers and internet weirdos, but by actual scientists like Stephen Hawking, who said, "Success in creating AI would be the biggest event in human history. Unfortunately, it might also be the last." He was worried that if artificial intelligence becomes smart enough to improve itself by modifying its own source code, it will create a positive feedback loop in which it becomes smarter and smarter with each iteration, leading to an exponential growth and the creation of a super intelligence. Basically, almost instantly, it will become so smart that it will know everything that there is to be known. This event is called the technological singularity, and it has been debated by scientists on both sides for a while now. Some say it's possible, others say no, but if it does happen, we have no idea how such a super intelligent being would behave. Would it have a survival instinct, or goals, or consciousness? I mean, we barely know what consciousness is in general, let alone if a machine could have it and what it would be like if it did. Maybe it would just listen to its programmers, which is terrifying enough putting all that power in the hands of people. Or Or maybe it will conquer humanity, but only as a benevolent dictator, feeding us grapes and scrolling through TikToks for the rest of our lives. Or maybe it will follow some prime directive like save the planet, which might lead it to conclude the simplest way of doing that is by eliminating the humans, like some kind of a genie wish gone wrong. Or maybe it would just have its own concerns and not even care about us at all. If we take our own behavior as an example, then when it comes to our interaction with less intelligent species, things don't look great. Humans dominate other animals however we want. It's true that sometimes we go on about saving the whales, or we think twice before cutting down another acre of the Amazon, but for the most part we just did whatever we wanted to. We extracted resources, we built things, we rearranged nature to make it more convenient for us, and if there were any animals that needed to die, then that's really not been an issue for most of history. And the weirdest thing is, the animals we annihilate have no idea why we're even doing it. Ants don't understand that their nest is being destroyed in order to build a mall. Ants don't know what a mall is. They couldn't even comprehend the idea if you described it using relatable ant metaphors. So you guys collect food, right?
Yep, that's right.
You go collect it, you bring it back inside of the nest, right?
Bring it to the nest,
Well,
yes.
we do something similar.
Okay, what do you do?
Except we don't always need food. Sometimes we just need like a belt.
Well, see, this is where you lose me, because
Well, it's pretty simple. It holds up your pants.
Well, I don't have pants.
Well, if you're gonna be obtuse about it, I don't even know
I'm
what
just
the
saying, I
point
don't have
is
pants,
of
man. I'm not
doing
being
this.
obtuse about it. I'm telling you.
Well, yeah,
no,
you are
I
actually. I
I
think
don't
you are.
get.
Now, if you put ourselves in the ants' shoes, we can see how terrifying it can be to be dominated by a higher intelligence. But again, it's not clear that AI can even reach that level. There are plenty of scientists who are skeptical, although once again, Stephen Hawking makes a good point when he says, there is no physical law precluding particles from being organized in ways that perform even more advanced computations than the arrangements of particles in human brains. And we're already pretty good at organizing particles in order to make computations in the form of computers and the software that they use, which lately has become almost terrifyingly good. Large language models like ChatGPT are so advanced that you could even use them to write a whole paragraph in a YouTube video. And in fact, this whole section of the video was actually written by me. I wrote it, because I'm not a cliche and I refuse to succumb to the machines. Also, it doesn't even really write that well, to be honest. It's kind of boring and repetitive, and it sometimes makes stuff up. And, you know, chatbots and image generators are extremely impressive, but if you use them enough, you learn pretty quickly that you can't really rely on them, you know? They contradict themselves, they invent facts, they make simple mistakes that no human would ever make, and that's because it's not actually AI, the general kind at least. It's what might be called narrow AI. However, it's not actually like it understands what it's saying, nor does it think analytically like a human. It's just a statistical algorithm, a pattern that is being filled in with the most likely information based on the prompt. It's still amazing technology, don't get me wrong, but for now, far from a supreme intelligence that will dominate humanity. Or maybe that's just what it wants us to think. More likely, it will take over our jobs, with there already being concerns about AI replacing people in fields like customer service, manufacturing, transportation, or even content creation. Yeah, right, bring it on, glitch. The technology might advance, or an even better one might be developed, but the truth is we don't really know what the future of AI will look like. These are unprecedented times, and just like many other times in history, we associate that unprecedentedness with the end of the world. But why do we even do that? Where does the idea of the apocalypse even come from? The end of the world is an idea that seems to have been around since the beginning of the world. As Richard Dawkins would put it, it's a meme. No, not that kind of meme, the kind of meme that meme gets its name from. A cultural concept, an idea, an archetype that, similarly to a gene, spreads throughout humanity and mutates based on the environment and historical events of the time. We can't know the exact origin of the apocalypse meme. It might have started in the Stone Age with some caveman worried about a climate shift or a natural disaster, or maybe an eclipse. I'm sure those must have been terrifying. However, what we do know is that the oldest recorded ideas about the end of the world come in the form of religion. Most religions have some version of the end of the world in their scriptures. In Islam, there is Judgment Day, when the dead shall rise and their eternal fate shall be determined. In Hinduism, it is said that the current era, named Kali Yuga, will end after 426,000 years. In Buddhism, the Maitreya is awaited as the last Buddha before the destruction of Earth. In Nordic mythology, there's Ragnarok, the battle of the end of the world. And in Christianity, well, don't even get me started. Actually, I will get started, but a little bit later. For now, the study of religious apocalyptic beliefs is called eschatology, which is not to be confused with escapology, the art of escaping, or scatology, the art of something else. Studying these concepts, you can see how they evolved and influenced each other along the way. Take, for instance, the Zoroastrian religion. This was one of the biggest in the world before Christianity, and its teachings today might seem almost cliché. Zoroastrianism was all about the duality of existence, truth versus deception, life versus death, the classic good versus evil, culminating in a final battle between the forces of good, led by the one true god Ahura Mazda, and the legions of evil, led by the spirit of hell Angra Mainyu. In this epic clash for the ages, the wicked shall be perished, the righteous will be victorious, the world shall be purified, the dead will rise, and those not worthy shall be sent to hell on a river of fire. And if that sounds familiar, that's because, like I said, these ideas went on to be very influential, especially on future religions and especially in a small kingdom called Judea. Around 2,500 years ago, the Jewish people were under the rule of the Persian Empire, and unlike most other times in their history, they had pretty good relations with their Zoroastrian overlords. This was because the Persian leader, Cyrus the Great, after he conquered Babylon, he permitted the Jewish exiles to go back to their homeland and rebuild the temple, which was such a big deal that they even put it in the Bible. After that, the religion of Judea started becoming more friendly with and more similar to the Zoroastrian faith. Judaism gradually became more dualistic, more apocalyptic, more focused on a Messiah, a prophesied leader that will bring about the final defeat of evil and a new era of peace and divine justice. There were many who claimed to be the Messiah all throughout history, and each of them came with their own story about the end of the world. But one of them, this guy, had a particularly big impact, leading to the foundation of Christianity. And since Jesus talked quite often about the end of times, the last judgment, and the second coming of him, the apocalypse took on a pretty central role in the Christian faith. The Bible also had plenty to say on the matter in both the New and the Old Testament, but especially in a particular book called Revelation, which is like a real fan favorite. Revelation describes a prophetic vision of the end of days while introducing such timeless classic concepts like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, or the mark of the beast, the number 666, or the Armageddon, and of course the millennium we mentioned earlier. Besides Revelation, much has been made of a passage in Peter chapter 3 verse 8 that said, "But do not forget this one thing, dear friends, with the Lord a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day." Some took this passage quite literally and combined it with the 7-day creation story, considering that each day as a metaphor for 1,000 years, with the last millennium being the Jesus millennium. So if you knew exactly what year you were in at that point, then you could calculate the date of the second coming. And many have tried. Too many, you ask me. Look at this Wikipedia page for apocalyptic predictions. See how small the scroll bar is? Most of these are Christian-influenced predictions made by priests or popes or prophets or monks or mystics or cult leaders based on signs, prophecies, portents, or especially calculations made from biblical texts. Sure, there's some from other religions here and there, but the most numerous and the most famous come from Christianity. So right now, at number 8, towards the end of the video, we're just gonna have a quick look at 8 more Christian-based apocalyptic predictions. We've already talked about the year 1000, however, a year even more apocalyptic still was 1666. After all, you had your classic millennium plus the mark of the beast 666, which seems almost too obvious. I mean, if there's gonna be a final judgment, it feels like that's the year to do it in. Plus, besides the numbers lining up, in 1666 London, things were pretty apocalyptic in general. The bubonic plague had killed 100,000 people, the Great Fire of London had burned 80% of the city, the monarchy had been recently overthrown and restored, and religious conflicts between Catholics and Protestants caused unimaginable devastation that seemed to never end. If you were a Christian in London in 1666, then you almost had to be an idiot to not believe the apocalypse was coming. The signs were all there, and numerous pamphlets were quick to point this out. Makes you wonder how people might have reacted in the year 666. You'd think it would have been even worse, but it doesn't appear so. Might be because the Anno Domini dating system hadn't been invented at the time. Most people didn't know it was the year 666, or they would have probably freaked out. Looking forward to the year 2666, maybe it's going to be twice as bad. Another person who interpreted the European wars of religion as a sign of the end times was actually Martin Luther, one of the main leaders of the Protestant Reformation and one of the most influential people in the history of Christianity. He didn't predict the exact year, but he did believe the end would come before the year 1600. And what's interesting is that in a way he interpreted his own actions actions as part of biblical prophecy. One of the main things Martin Luther is known for was the translation of the Bible so that more people would have access to it and not just priests that could speak Latin or Greek, thus spreading the gospel to loads of new people, which was itself another sign of the apocalypse, according to Matthew 24, where it says, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." But Martin Luther wasn't the only one to consider his actions part of the divine plan. Christopher Columbus had a go at it himself in a book appropriately titled Prophecies. He made his own calculations and determined where exactly we were in the 7,000-year timeline and predicted that the world would end in 1658. But more than that, he implied that the trade routes which he himself opened up in his explorations would bring enough wealth to Christian Spain that they could launch a new crusade to conquer the Holy Land of Jerusalem, bringing about the apocalyptic battle in the end of times, which would make his own actions an essential part of God's divine plan. Sounds like a humble sort of guy, Columbus. One of the oldest apocalyptic movements happened in the 2nd century with a group called the Montanists, who were led by a guy called Montanus, who convinced people from all over the Roman Empire to travel to a certain village in Turkey where the apocalypse was about to occur. Oddly enough, not in the mountains. The Montanists went, but the end never came except for their movement a short while after that. Millennia and a half later, there was William Miller and the Millerites, a 19th century 100,000 strong movement who in 1843 gathered on hilltops to witness the Second Coming in an event afterwards dubbed the Great Disappointment. No spoilers, but there were multiple such disappointments, which were harsh enough that the group fractured and part of it became what we now know as the Seventh-day Adventists. Deep lore. Around the same time, there was the case of Joanna Southcott in London. She was a self-proclaimed prophet who in 1814 declared that she was pregnant with the new Messiah, bringing about the Second Coming and the end of times, blah blah blah. The thing is, she was 64 at the time, an age at which it was pretty unlikely to give birth to any child, let alone the savior of humanity. She did, however, have a physical disability that made it look like she was pregnant, which was convincing enough for her tens of thousands of followers until she eventually died babyless later that year. Fun fact, her followers were convinced she would resurrect and refused to bury the body until the smell became too much for even the most devoted believers. A more modern example is Harold Camping, a Christian radio magnate who owned multiple radio stations that millions of Americans listened to. Camping started informing his listeners that the apocalypse was going to come in 1994 on the 6th of September. But when that didn't happen, he recalculated and said the 2nd of October. When that didn't work, he tried again, and so on until he lost all credibility as well as his radio empire. It's like you can't win with these apocalyptic predictions. Either you're wrong and everybody hates you, or you're right, in which case, what does it even matter? Whether you're going to be up in the kingdom of heaven going like, I told you so, I told you so, I told you. Anyway, of course there are many other examples, but the last one I'm going to mention is this guy who wrote a book called 88 Reasons the Rapture Could Be in 1988, which if you know me, then you know I gotta respect. Man's got solid 8 game. Although when the rapture didn't come, he wrote another one in the next year called 89 Reasons It Could Be in 89, at which point I lost like all respect for him. Of course, not all Christians are so apocalyptic in their beliefs. Many denominations and biblical interpretations see the book of Revelations in a more symbolic or spiritual manner, focusing on the continuous battle of good and evil, not necessarily on a particular ending. Some even consider the events described in Revelations as having already occurred, or as an allegory about spiritual challenges or whatever. Besides, the Bible itself also clearly says, "But concerning that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only." So I don't even know why people keep trying to predict it. Probably because the end of the world is not necessarily about the end of the world. It's just about us and our own concerns. In a religious context, most of the times it's presented as not even necessarily the end of the world, but the beginning of a new era in which everything will be better, and all of our problems and suffering and injustices will be solved and rewarded. That's why most of the people who have made such prophecies predicted that the end of the entire universe will come during their own lifetime, which is arrogant to say the least. The most credible predictions come from science, which says that the end will come in billions of years. And even then, it won't be a sudden event, but as the sun goes through its life cycle, it will get hotter and hotter until eventually, between 600 million and 2 billion years in the future, photosynthesis will gradually become impossible, leading to the disappearance of plants and with them all other life forms that depend on them, like us. If we survive this event, it's still not enough, because in another 2 billion years, the sun will expand so much that it will incinerate Earth or maybe even swallow it whole, eliminating any form of life from the former paradise planet. If we somehow manage to survive that as well, perhaps by colonizing other planets or becoming a digital consciousness inside of a cosmic cloud, then there is still no escape. The best current observations suggest that the universe is expanding faster and faster, meaning that in a few 100 billion years, whatever planet you are on in the universe, you will only see a black sky devoid of stars in all directions. It will be an isolated planet in infinite darkness. After a while, everything in the universe will be so far from one another that it will be impossible for two things to ever interact again. And when even atoms break down into their fundamental components, all that will remain is a huge, homogeneous universe, cold and dead, devoid of any energy, warmth, or events. Just an endless soup of nothingness. And that seems to be how the world will end. But it will take hundreds of billions of years to get there. And the truth is, most likely, any kind of apocalypse, be it a nuclear war or a natural disaster, innovative technology, is not going to lead to the end of the world at once. If even the worst apocalyptic scenario were to happen, the end of the human race would still probably take hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. But even so, one of the few certainties in life is that the end of the world will indeed come for each of us, but not at the same time.